Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrell, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
Welcome to the Workology Podcast, sponsored by Workology's learning platform, where we support HR with certification prep, recertification with SHRM and HRCI, and online training for managers and people leaders. You can learn more about our offerings at workology.com/shop. Selecting and implementing payroll tech is one of my least favorite things to do working in human resources. It is not fun, cutting edge, or sexy. It is, however, a foundational part of setting up an HR department and the organization for success. Labor costs, including payroll, often represent a very large portion of business expenses. The BLS states that labor costs can be 70.4% of total business expenses. Our employees need to be paid, taxes need to be collected correctly, might I add, and employees need to have access to things like pay stubs, PTO, and vacation balances, not to mention a safe and accessible place to add their own time in, whether they're clocking into a traditional time clock at the office or they're logging their hours remotely. So essential. This means that technology selection and payroll is critical, which is why we need it to be flawless. And I wanted to tap a payroll systems technology expert to help us as we move through such an important and essential implementation. I mention all this as I'm excited to be launching a new feature on Workology. It's called the Marketplace. It's a technology marketplace where you can research different tech in a variety of areas, including payroll, that our community has found success with. And you can check it out over at marketplace.workology.com. Before I introduce our guests, I do want to hear from you. Please comment the word podcast over on my pinned post on Instagram at Workology Blog, and you can ask me questions there, leave comments, and make suggestions for future guests. I want to hear from you. I really do. More information helps this podcast grow, and content and just resources that are more in alignment with you. Today's podcast guest is Penny McNerney, SPHR and SHRM SCP. She is an HR consultant and founder of Total Circle HR. Penny has over 2 decades of global and domestic HR experience, including public, private, nonprofit, startup, family-owned, and educational, as well as unionized workforce collaborations. Penny is an innovative problem solver who leverages her precise data-driven mindset to analyze business operations, discern priorities, and formulate solutions and improvements. And she has had her shares, you're going to hear about, of payroll technology implementations, especially working in fast-moving and growing organizations. Penny, welcome back to the Workology Podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited. I don't know if we should be excited about talking about payroll systems, but as you said, you have to have it.
If you don't, you are setting yourself up for a huge situation, like tables flipping over, place catching on fire. Like it can be, it really impacts our employees in a really negative way, as it would. Let's talk a little bit about your background and what led you here to being well-versed in payroll and all things payroll implementation.
Sure. So I'm Penny, and I am the CEO and owner of Total Circle HR, which is a boutique HR consulting company that offers everything from recruitment to policies, procedures, employee engagement, employee relations, and payroll. I don't own a payroll company. I'm not affiliated with any payroll companies, but I do run payroll. My experience, I have had 3 different experiences with 3 different companies implementing 3 different payroll systems. And what's interesting is 2 of the companies were within the own company. So upgrading to another platform where sometimes you think that that's easier, but it's just like going out to market and implementing a whole new payroll system.
I think that's good to know, because when they might sell you on said process, they say, oh, it's going to be easy peasy.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Yes, they do. No, because what I have learned is that the payroll systems within a payroll company don't necessarily talk to each other, and it is two separate teams.
Let's talk about maybe some positive things first, right?
Yes.
What have you liked most about payroll implementation processes? And it's cool to name names if there is one that you had a good experience with and you thought the payroll implementation process worked well and really worked with the changes that you and the team were making.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's as much as everybody talks about the negatives. I'm glad that we're talking about the positives because, as we said, you have to pay people. It's fundamental. It's the law. You can't get around it. And gone are the days where we're handwriting checks. So I think based on my experience, what I've liked the most was when I had a really, really hands-on implementation team from that payroll company. And what that means is, all teams come out and they're all excited. It means that they're really listening to the client and that they understand the nuance of your business, because every business is different, whether you have one employee or you have thousands of employees. And I have to say, my last payroll implementation, I just went through this 6 months ago, and it was with Paychex. And Paychex gets sometimes not a really, really good, they get a bad rap. And I had the most awesome payroll implementation team. They had a great project manager, and it was a switch. The company that the client that I was working with, they were going from a PEO in Paychex out of the PEO to a regular payroll without the PEO. And what set this implementation team apart was really the project manager for Paychex. I was shocked because I had heard all of these things about Paychex. So I wasn't going in with very high hopes, and I was so pleasantly surprised at how smooth the implementation went. And it was really because they listened to what my client needed, and we did it step by step. It was not a check of a box. It was actually, are we ready to move on to the next phase of the implementation? So absolutely have to give kudos to Paychex and that particular implementation team.
I love that. And I think that sometimes we forget that this is a project management process, right?
Yes.
And you can't rush that. It involves someone who's very detail oriented and checks off all the boxes and makes sure that everybody has done all their parts, because if it isn't done correctly, that's when disaster strikes.
And I can tell you all about that.
And maybe we'll get to that.
Oh,
What about unexpected issues? So I know these are popping up. How do you manage unexpected issues during a payroll, like rollout?
Well, from my perspective, you always have to have a plan B, right? If you're coming from one system to another, you have to make sure that even when you say you're going to go live, that you have a backup, right? Because again, like we started to say, you have to pay people. One of the biggest challenges, and I'll tell you this story, was when I was with a very large company. There were about 6 FEINs, and when we went to implement, 80% of the population was hourly, so that means 20% was salaried. When we went to implement, we couldn't pay the hourly employees because from the beginning we kept saying the mapping is wrong. And they kept saying, no, the mapping is right. The mapping is right. And so when it was time to go live, 80% of the population could not receive their pay. That was absolutely a failed implementation. And I think for anybody that's going for an implementation, whether you have hourly employees or you have salaried employees, listen to what you're seeing, the data that's coming out and the testing that you're doing. And if it's not correct, stop it right then and there. You know, we all say they're the experts. The payroll implementation team is the expert. They know what they're doing. But in this one case, and it happened twice, not just once, twice with two different companies, when you see those red flags, you have to speak up and you have to be firm and you have to just stop them to say, yes, I know we have a go live date, but we can't go live because you're still running. You should still be running payroll in the other payroll system that you're doing until you're ready to go live.
I think this is all good advice, right? So speak up if you feel like something's wrong and you're concerned. And then two, always have a backup plan so that your people can get paid, because thankfully it sounds like you did. People got paid.
Yes. Yeah. And it was, I remember we sat there till after midnight and said, okay, wait, our payroll does not look correct. It's really low. And then we had to have that backup plan. We had to, like, say we're going back into the old system so that we could pay people. I had another mishap too, that I thought the implementation was going really, really well. And the two teams didn't speak to each other. The old team from the payroll system to the new team ran payroll. Everything came back. Everything processed. All the reports came. Friday morning, my phone was ringing off the hook. Nobody got paid. I said, what are you talking about? I could see it in the payroll system, in the new payroll system. I can see it. No, they never processed it on their end.
Wow. Okay. So, and you've done several implementations. So obviously,
Yes.
like, the nice thing about repeating not exactly the same process, but a similar one over and over again is that you can reiterate, get a chance for improvement, kind of think about changes, updates, enhancements that you can make for next time for things to be better. Is there anything, especially maybe with this last one, that you feel like you would want to do differently when you move towards your next payroll implementation project?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what I've learned is test, and do parallels. Do parallel payrolls to make sure that what you're doing in the system that you have right now and then the system that you're going to, that it is going to match. And a big thing also is to think about the data. So data going in, because you take the data from the old system to put into the new system. Bad data going in is only going to give you bad data out. So there's so much preparation that you have to do on the other side as well, that a lot of times people forget about that. And they're like, oh, well, we're getting a new payroll system. We'll clean it all up in the new system. But if you're taking incorrect data and then putting it into the new system, you're not going to get the correct data out.
I feel like we've already answered this question a little bit, but maybe if you have any other insights about how did your team prepare for the payroll data migration, and maybe any other lessons that you haven't talked about yet.
Right. Well, we really prepared. We ran a lot of reports just again to make sure that everything was correct. And I think with this last implementation, why it went so smoothly, even outside of the great implementation team on the payroll side, was that what I had learned while I was doing this is constantly test. Constantly test the data the payroll company will give you like an outline of what needs to be done, and a lot of people think that they can just sidestep that it is so important to do every step. Don't just check the box, but do every set and let somebody else look at it. Because a lot of times when you're in the data, it's numbers. It's like you see it and you think, okay, this is correct. Have somebody else on that payroll team or an outside person, a consultant, look and examine the data, because when we're doing it ourselves, we think, okay, 1-0, that looks right. So I think the biggest thing that payroll teams can do is ensure that one, their data is correct and they are doing testing and run as many parallel payrolls as you can.
Let's take a reset here. This is Jessica Miller-Merrell, and you are listening to the Workology Podcast, powered by Workology's learning platform for HR certification, recertification, and manager training. Today, I'm talking with Penny McNerney about payroll technology implementation. You can learn more about starting your research process when it comes to HR tech by visiting the Workology Marketplace, which is available at marketplace.workology.com. I know you mentioned the project manager, which I think is a great thing for us to think about when we are selecting our payroll vendor and maybe asking about the implementation process. But was there any other training or resources that you felt like have been the most valuable during implementation that you feel like folks who are watching, listening should say, hey, I need these things from you, external vendor?
I think that if you're in payroll, you know what to look for. But if you're not in that avenue, then I definitely would go on webinars. I would research the companies. And a lot of times when you're doing your research, you can go out and they'll have training videos. Again, I think the more knowledge that the company that's going to implement a new payroll system can get, I think that's so important. Do references. I remember after the first payroll debacle that I was like, we are never doing this. We're going to ask for references, but we're going to ask for references for companies that similar to ours. And because we had so many different entities, we needed to do the research. We needed to have references from companies that were similar to ours to see what their experience is. But there's so much out there today that you can educate yourself on what the do's and don'ts of implementing a payroll company, choosing a payroll company, and what is best for your company. Because there's so many different payroll companies out there now. There's the big box, there's the smaller names, there's the unknown names, and each one of them has a service that they want to offer the client, and they make it sound phenomenal. So it's really, really doing your research and what fits best for your company now, and if your company is growing. That's really, really important.
So I'm thinking about what you said, your company is growing. When you were looking at your selection, were you thinking about short term, or were you trying to in terms of a vendor relationship, or were you thinking more longer term, 24 or 36 months in terms of being able to grow? Because my thought is if this is such a pain in the, you want to make sure that this relationship and the implementation is something that you might be sticking with for a period of time. Do you look at short term, or is it a long term relationship for you for implementation and providers?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's based on the company, but if I was advising a company, I would say, what are we looking at now? But what is your strategic growth plan? How are we growing? Are we going to grow by 10 people? Are we going to grow by 20, 50? And then look for a system that can grow with you. Because again, like you just said, nobody wants to go through another payroll implementation. So if you have a system that can grow with you, perhaps you don't need to turn on everything. There's so many different modules now in a payroll system, and you don't have to implement all of them at once, but it's important to know the capability if your company does grow or go the opposite way, that you have the opportunity to turn on different modules or turn off.
I think that's really important. So that means you, as the HR practitioner, the person who's overseeing the technology and the payroll, you need to be really familiar what the capabilities are within your payroll tech that you're using.
Exactly. Yes. Mm-hmm.
In your implementation experience, have you done payroll in-house, or have you used an external vendor? And if so, like either of those, like why did you choose the approach that you did?
We used an external vendor to set up the system, and then after processing, they take care of everything from taxes to liability. And the reason that for the companies that I have worked for or have been an HR consultant for, there really wasn't anybody in-house to be able to do that, to have that dedication. And as we evolved with payroll systems now just don't run payroll, they house everything. So from my perspective, again, based on what that company is looking for, do they actually have the time to do it in-house? And a lot of companies just don't have the resources to do that. Or do they want that external vendor that would house their payroll and be able to house so much more to be able to do it? You still need somebody actually doing the data entry and checking the payroll. But in my experience, it's always been that we've gone out to market and then set up the vendor.
I think that's pretty common. It would just be fun for me to have a conversation with somebody who actually does it in-house just to see. But I think if I probably talk to 100 HR practitioners, maybe 2 would do that, maybe less. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. Do you feel like when you moved to this new payroll system, it improved the overall efficiency and wait, maybe what other ways did it meet your needs? Because were the employees happier? I mean, what was the benefit that you saw maybe in areas that you didn't expect?
Yeah, no, definitely. Even in all the systems I have implemented, there's always been a benefit for the employees. In the beginning, might be a little painful. It's all about how the teams communicate out what's going on. But we were able to house documents, which we never were able to do. We were able to track sick and PTO, and it wasn't manual. We weren't doing it on a spreadsheet. Everything was done. The employee had self-service that they could go in, they could see everything. They could see their pay, they could update their address, they could update their tax forms. The reporting is so much more robust that we know everything is about reporting, numbers, and to be able to go in and set it up and say, this is the report that I need, even from an HR standpoint. I just had to run a report with the updated FSLA coming in January. I had to run a report and it turned it around in 2 minutes, so I could see who's under, and we have to look at from an exempt position. So efficiency, especially today with all of the different nuances that a payroll system can do, can absolutely save time and become more efficient.
I do remember the old days when there was no employee self-service or any of those things.
Me too.
And the manual process that we had to go through, or if you didn't put in the tax information just right, the problems that were created as a result. So I love that it allows for employees to have access to the reporting and the information when they need it, and then to be able to make changes when they need it for them, and it's instantaneous.
Exactly. And it's not so manual that somebody that doesn't know somebody's address is typing it in, and there's just so much more room for error.
Uh, Not payroll related, but I keep thinking of like the AS400 system, which is like the first HR system that I worked on.
I remember that.
And I had
Mhm.
to tab over like 8 times to put like a new hire in. And I remember one time, and I was really, really new, I accidentally terminated somebody.
Mhm.
It was a
Mhm.
nightmare. And then their 401k stopped, and it was like their vacation paid out happened. It was, I don't know. I don't even remember how we fixed it. I had to call somebody at corporate and probably submit a bunch of
Right.
forms, and fax some things in. But it was a nightmare. So I'm grateful for the SaaS process and this employee self-service, because it's, man, I felt horrible when I did
Mhm.
that. Now they're able to make their updates and adjustments on their own, so less likely for human error.
Exactly. And there's there you now payroll systems have onboarding. So if you have a new hire, everything goes through the system, from the recruitment to the offer letter to anything that's part of that onboarding process. Everything's in one place, instead of, I remember the days, let's email the offer letter. Let's email them the handbook. Let's email them this. Some people don't even look at their email. So this, the updated payroll system, to me, it's like a one-stop shop, and everything is in it. And again, because the employee has so much access to that self-service, so much less room for error.
Perfect. Any advice that you would have for someone who's just getting started, maybe their payroll selection journey, not even moving to implementation? I feel like implementation is a whole nother animal, but like the selection process, how many vendors do you normally look at? Or, how do you prepare for those kinds of conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have a lot of back work to do, right? You need to sit down and say, what do we need from a payroll system? What is our budget? Because it's really, really important. And then I always advise my clients, let's look at 3 to 4, and where they're all similar, but who do you have the best feeling from? And do those references. I think it's so important. Ask them who their clients are, look on their website who their clients are, and reach out to HR. Reach out, go on LinkedIn or find them and reach out and ask the questions of how did their implementation go. But what's really, really important, the key is know what you want, because everything looks great, and you get in those meetings and you're like, oh my gosh, this is going to change my life. This is phenomenal. And so if you know what you want by doing the research, there's so much out there now, right? Just Google. That's my favorite friend.
The reference piece, I think, is key, right? Like, don't just
Mhm.
read the case study on the website and the video of the person. Like, send a call, because, not that I'm saying, but something could have changed
Right.
in the time frame since that case study was created, and or you might get more information to help you make the best decision for you and your organization.
Exactly. If we would have had done that years ago when we couldn't pay 80% of our population, I think we would have had a different outcome. And then when we were so entrenched in the implementation where there was no turning back, that's when we said at that time, this is years ago, that's when we said at that time, we should have reached out. And when we did reach out, we didn't get such great feedback. So it's really, really important. Know what you want. Sometimes don't be fooled by the smoke and mirrors, because it all looks great. And do those reference checks, but do it on similar sized companies that are based on what you have.
Last question for you. I feel like most payroll companies that are legit, they do have good compliance and accuracy, like, in what they do. But do you have any advice for maybe somebody who wants to ensure that things are compliant? Not necessarily, I feel like after implementation, but I feel like that point where we are merging systems, starting things new, that's when things can become really likely for errors to happen. It, is there any other advice that you have to ensure that everything's compliant and then the information, the pay is accurate when we go through that first maybe couple of payroll cycles?
Test, test, test. Do parallels. It is the most important thing, and push back. If they say you can only do one parallel, do 2 or 3. Push back. Remember that we're the client and they're the vendor. Don't move on until you don't have those questions anymore. That's the biggest piece of advice. And that's going through, right? Going through the whole implementation, even before you run that first payroll, second payroll. I always advise clients also look at the time of year you're going to implement. End of year, January, do you want 2 different W-2s? So when you think an implementation typically takes a couple of months, right? Depending on the size of your company. So decide when the best time to do the implementation is, because if you do 2 different, sometimes you get 2 different W-2s, everything has to go over, but it's also based on when a company's fiscal year is too.
I think that's really, really great advice. I'm also thinking like test and retest too, because if you think about like you have a sales team, right? And commission structure, those kind of payments, like those don't happen all the time. So making sure that you're testing and, like you said, running parallels to make sure that those things are hopefully seamless, especially if they don't happen as often as your regular payroll cycle. So.
Absolutely. Think of, when you're doing your testing, think of every scenario, whether it happens once a year, once a month, whenever it happens. Think of every scenario and put those scenarios in when you're testing.
Well, Penny, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. Where can people go to learn more about you and your consulting work?
Yeah, so they can reach out to me at penny@totalcirclehr.com. My website is totalcirclehr.com.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate your knowledge in this area, because it's a doozy. It can be a doozy.
It can. Doesn't necessarily have to, but it can.
Payroll implementation is essential, and I mean essential, which is why having proper planning, a great HR tech implementation team by your vendor, and plans for different scenarios is so important. And if you're thinking about different payroll tech offerings, whether it's global payroll or US based, as well as employer of record or PEO tech, head on over to the Workology Marketplace to get started learning about and demoing some of my favorite HR technologies in this or other areas. Also, thank you again to Penny for her insights here. Payroll tech implementation starts with great research to fit the needs of your business and how you support that. You need a great project plan, and this is going to help you anticipate those implementation challenges and ensure it to be as seamless as possible. If you're looking for places and spaces to gain support and insights into tech selection, head on over to marketplace.workology.com to start your research and tech evaluation process. If you have suggestions on products or technologies you'd like me to spotlight over there, let me know, as this marketplace is really just launching exclusively for the Workology community. I also want to thank you for joining the Workology Podcast, sponsored by Workology's learning platform for HR certification, recertification, and manager training. Head on over to look at our offerings there at workology.com/shop. You can also check out the marketplace. This podcast is for the disruptive workplace leader who is tired of the status quo. My name is Jessica Miller-Merrell. Until next time, you can visit workology.com to listen to all our previous Workology podcast episodes.